Joe Dumars' choice of Troy Weaver, formerly of Detroit, as his first hire raises a lot of eyebrows. Here's why it could be a game changer, good or bad, for the Pelicans. Let's break it down in Friday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday, final show of the week, unless we get some big news over the weekend, then we'll do a bonus show here. But Joe Dumars has made his first big hire with the team, Troy Weaver, formerly of Detroit, where the record was not good. I'll break down why this is actually a pretty concerning hire, but also why it might work out. And then what it means for other members of the Pelicans front office, or now former members of the Pelicans front office. And then I want to get into something in The Athletic where the Pelicans were voted third worst franchise. It's all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, so please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We'll do a live show next week. That was a fun one here, but we got a lot to talk about in today's show, so let's get to it. Came out today that the New Orleans Pelicans are hiring Troy Weaver, or the other day about hiring Troy Weaver, formerly of the Detroit Pistons, to be the new Senior Vice President of Basketball Operations. Senior Vice President of Basketball Operations is the same title that Swin Cash had recently for the team. Shamit Dua said it first, broke it first, that Swin Cash would not be retained by this. When someone comes in with the same title as someone previously, that's pretty obvious that they were going to make some changes there. What it sounds like, though, that Bryson Graham, the general manager, is still there. You know, one of the things I made an emphasis to point out was he was kind of with the group, the brain trust of the Pelicans and Joe Dumars during the introductory press conference. Swin Cash was not in that room. So maybe it means Bryson Graham is safe. We'll see as other decisions start to get made. There were some also changes to the scouting staff, things like that as well. But the big one is Troy Weaver. This is the type of hire that makes you concerned about the direction of the team. It might work out, and we'll get into the positives. He drafted well, and when you look at Detroit, who's playing literally right now as I record this show, you know, he built the core of that team, and they were good this year. Really fun, really good. So there's reasons for optimism, but this is the type of hire that makes you go, oh no, the Pelicans are going backwards. And undoing a lot of at least the good infrastructure building and getting a lot of smart people in the building that David Griffin was doing. Troy Weaver, in his 4 or 5 seasons with Detroit, went 74 and 244. That was the win-loss record by that team. That's 23.3%. They averaged 18.5 wins per season as he was in charge of that team. And last year, when he said, we're ready to compete, this is the year that we're going to be good, they hired Monty Williams. That was more an ownership decision, not a Troy Weaver decision, but an ownership thing. The year that they were supposed to go and compete, they finished with the worst record in the league and had a 28-game, a historic record-long losing streak. So how does that happen? And why do you want that person running, in charge of a team or high up in a team? And after Detroit, Weaver went to the Washington Wizards, where they were atrocious this year. And frankly, look, I'm not blaming anything in Washington on Troy Weaver here, right? They have their own executive in Michael Winger, and that team is trashed from decisions well before this past year in what was going on there. In fact, they drafted Alex Sarr, who looks to be pretty good. They've done a few decent things there, including trading away someone like Kyle Kuzma, who just didn't fit on that roster. So there's some good things that Troy Weaver was involved in here. But 74 wins, 244 losses. I asked our Locked On Pistons host about it and what his initial reaction was and what he thought about that time of Weaver here in Detroit. It was not great. He literally, the first thing he sent was a GIF of "not great, Bob." And so I asked, I was like, well, he drafted pretty well. The win-loss record is atrocious, but were the Pistons really expecting a rebuild here? And he goes, when it comes to asset management, putting a team together, and pieces that make sense, Troy Weaver was awful. And those are my biggest concerns about Troy Weaver and coming in a pretty significant role to this team. He drafted well. We'll give him that, right? And we'll talk about that in the next segment. But everything else was a bit of a mess. It did not seem like Troy Weaver had much of a vision for that Pistons roster. Acquiring talent, maybe through the draft. Trades, free agency, no. But at least getting the drafted talent there. But then you've got to do something with that. Yes, it's a talent-driven league. You got to acquire talent. I agree with you. But there needs to be a vision for how the team should play, how they should, a culture and all that. And there was none of that there. Even someone like Isaiah Stewart, who's Troy Weaver's pick, this year has looked absolutely fantastic. But he was there playing a different role this year. Isaiah Stewart is. And would that have happened under Troy Weaver? And I don't know. Would that have worked? And when you look at, the asset mismanagement of assets, trading for a lot of big men, there is definitely a big focus from him on big men. More on that in a second. Using draft capital to get multiple mismatched big men that just don't fit your overall pretty athletic roster, that's not a good thing. You need to have a vision for what you want to build this team into and acquire those kind of players. Or maybe you don't have a vision to start, but you see who your core pieces are and then how you kind of build out from there. And that's not what he was capable of doing. He could not find veterans to put around the young guys, and you need veterans to put around the young guys, right? They didn't have enough shooting there and focused too much on big men, and that led them to really struggling in terms of offense in the NBA. Those are all things that are not good. And now that person is arguably second in command of the team in some capacity. That's a big concern here. Now, maybe Weaver has grown. Maybe he won't be fully in charge like he was, and he's not fully in charge like he was in Detroit. So there's reasons to feel okay about it. But look, the league is built around guard and wing play right now. And he was focused on big men, centers, power forwards. Now, there's still a need for bigs. The Pelicans have need for bigs. And you're seeing the league shift a little bit away from guards and wings back towards bigs, but not to an extreme point and not all that much. So is this someone who's gets what you need to do to compete in the current, call it, meta of the NBA? And I'm not entirely sure about that. This is maybe someone who needed to kind of do a little bit more rehabbing of his reputation before kind of taking a senior vice president of basketball operations role, whatever that encompasses, and that's a pretty nebulous title. And when we look at Swin Cash leaving, she was involved in, had her hands in so many different areas of the team, whether it was just connecting with players and building relationships with them. Zion Williamson has said how much he enjoyed Swin Cash and really appreciated Swin Cash and valued Swin Cash. A lot of the other players have too, but she was involved in transactions and other things as well. So Weaver's going to have his hands in a lot here, and that is fairly concerning. Now, he's got a good track record elsewhere. Was with OKC. He was the guy behind kind of the Russell Westbrook pick there. That was clearly great. It was very, very highly thought of with the Utah Jazz as well. So there's a lot of skills there to like from him. But looking at his time in Detroit, which is what we evaluate here, that's rough. And in a small market, we said asset mismanagement. It's like throwing bad money after good money kind of thing, or good money after bad money, whatever the phrase is. You know what I'm saying? That's a lot of what he did. And in a small market like New Orleans, you need to have good asset management. That was arguably one of Griffin's worst things, especially when you look at, the BI trade occurring too late, using a draft pick to get Devontae Graham and then having to trade Devontae Graham with 4 second-round picks, using first-round picks to trade for centers constantly. All that stuff is a concern. You need to manage your assets well. Troy Weaver did not do that in Detroit. Drafted fine, but did not manage assets well. There's more to building a roster than just simply drafting guys. So asset management, vision for a team, and putting that together and making the most of your pieces that you have is something that he struggled with. That's a concern. It's a big time concern. The Pelicans need to get this right. Otherwise, it's going to set them back a really, really long time. We'll see. The front office is still coming together. And at a certain point, it's just, okay, we need to see, how it's going to look overall. All right, coming up next, let's be optimistic about it. Here's why I think Troy Weaver might actually fit, especially with Joe Dumars. We're going to be positive and optimistic. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started using Monarch Money, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I can budget smarter and save even more money. Those fees really add up. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We'll do a live show next week on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube channel. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. It's a key off season here, and we're covering it all. And you could win big by subscribing. Subscribe between April 7th, 2025 and April 30th, 2025 for your chance to win one of these amazing prizes. $2,500 Best Buy gift card, $300 to Game Time, or $200 to Fanatics. Get exclusive insight into free agency draft coverage and team updates delivered straight to your inbox with the Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Subscribe to enter today by clicking in the link in the description or go to lockedondaily.com. All right, let's be positive here. When I first saw the Troy Weaver news breaking and all of that, I was like, oh no, this is not good. This is not good. And this is where you get concerned about the direction of the team. And I think that's a valid thing to feel right now. As much of a straight shooter that Joe Dumars is, and that's a good quality, I think. You got to get good people in the building, and he even said that. So he seems to think highly of Troy Weaver. Let's roll with that for a second here. Let's be positive and optimistic about it here, because I do think when you look at Joe Dumars, Troy Weaver, and maybe even Bryson Graham in the mix, depending on what's going to happen there, there's reasons to be optimistic, right? Joe Dumars did a good job in the press conference. We talked about that, kind of saying the right things, really focusing on the people and getting the right type of individuals, the right type of intangibles that this team has been lacking. They've been lacking toughness. They've probably been lacking discipline, right? And so trying to add some of that to this team, I am all on board with that. And I see the purpose of that. I see the vision there when it comes to it. Just get a bunch of hungry dudes on the team and let's go kind of thing that are also talented. You gotta do that as well. Dumars was great at trades in Detroit for the first half of his tenure, really opportunistic. And you're entering, as I did a show on this last week, the Everydayers know, you're in a period of time in the NBA where you can be really opportunistic with that dreaded, scary second apron. You're going to see teams like the Celtics and others really trade away good role players that maybe could step into a bigger role. Are the Pistons going to be able to keep someone like new sixth man of the year, Peyton Pritchard, for forever? Or if they're in a title contending window, are they going to have to trade someone like that? Might you be able to go and get a guy like Jaylen Brown or something like that too, just because the Celtics can't afford him? That's going to be the case for teams like the Suns. You're going to see a Kevin Durant trade this offseason. It's going to be a team like Denver. You're going to see Milwaukee kind of get into that too. All of those teams with high payrolls, even the Knicks, you're going to see all of that. And you go and get some of those good players that could maybe succeed in even a bigger role that are kind of being cast off from some of these franchises because they just can't afford these people anymore. And the answer to that is yes. And Joe Dumars is, based off his time in Detroit, a really good option to try and kind of spearhead that type of operation and front office work. Troy Weaver is good at drafting. Dumars was not good at drafting. But Troy Weaver really did. And if you look at some of the players that he's picked, you're seeing his fingerprints all over this current Detroit team right now. Look, Cade Cunningham, he was the natural number one overall pick, but you still got to not overthink it and take that guy. So you don't want to put too much stock into that pick necessarily, but that draft ended up being pretty good. And so you look at that and you're like, all right, he nailed that one. He drafted a Sir Thompson who looks absolutely fantastic and is a big reason why there's a lot of toughness on that team. And that was a bit of a controversial pick. And someone who couldn't shoot, couldn't really score, but had so many defensive intangibles and other things that he saw a guy that could really grow. So he went out and got a Sir Thompson in what was not a certain pick at that point in time. Isaiah Stewart being that center that you could use in a variety of roles, a little bit smaller, but a tough guy that goes out and like that dude wants to fight everybody, it feels like. That was a good pick. That guy's still in the league. Jalen Duren looks pretty good overall as a center, and you do need big men when it comes to that sort of thing, right? And even someone like Jaden Ivey, before injuries have really harmed him here, looked like he was starting to kind of, be the guy that you wanted him to be. This season, he was averaging almost 18 points per game and shooting over 40% from three. He was finally starting to have that breakout season. He looks like he's going to be pretty good when he comes back from the broken leg and everything that he is dealing with right now. So we'll see where he ends up in the future. There's a couple other guys just in the league that Troy Weaver drafted that are still floating around, right? He's got some misses here and there. Killian Hayes was definitely a miss, but a lot of people would have missed on that and the players that come after. And frankly, everyone has those type of misses when it comes to drafting. No one's perfect. That ends up, in my opinion, kind of like being okay when it comes to all of it. So when you look at his track record, it's not bad, in my opinion, when it comes to drafting. And this is a team that needs to draft well, right? Like they have to draft well. Small markets, it just absolutely do need to draft well. And that's what you're getting a guy that can do that. You put him along with someone like Bryson Graham, who's done a lot of good work with that. You feel pretty optimistic that maybe you look at Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver kind of covering for each other's weaknesses in a sense. Don't let Troy Weaver handle a lot of the trade type of stuff, and don't let him focus on that. Let him focus on scouting, the draft, and all of that. And when you see the Pelicans letting scouts go and that type of stuff, maybe that's what Troy Weaver is coming in to kind of spearhead and lead some of it, right? That title of Senior Vice President of Basketball Operations is very nebulous and can mean a lot of different things. I don't put a lot of stock into titles for folks as well. So you see this and you're like, okay, yeah, this actually could probably work here. And if these two, where there are clear weaknesses in both of them, are playing to their strengths and not focusing on the areas that they're weak, that is, in my opinion, how you build a pretty good front office and get a lot of smart people in the room that are experts in what they do and let them handle that kind of stuff, and you don't meddle in that. And maybe that's what we're going to see here. That's what we're hopeful we're going to see here in New Orleans, because on the surface of this one's not great. The drafting's good. Those names we said, I love this Pistons team. This is who I'm rooting for in the playoffs. They're a lot of fun to watch. They're just a really good story. And this might be one of those things where in a couple of years, there's some kind of revisionist history or looking back on a guy like Troy Weaver in a different light than before. But if you let him kind of play to his strength, that's what you want. Same with Joe Dumars here. That's why I'm hopeful they're keeping someone like Bryson Graham. We got no official word on that sort of thing, but looks to be safe at least right now. We'll see. There's going to be more changes and things like that coming too. But this is the type, and Weaver's been around other successful organizations. The Jazz, when they were successful, and the OKC has been successful for a very long time now. So you're getting the right kind of people in the room maybe, and then you kind of figure out what everyone needs to do, and you kind of divvy up the work and slot people into the proper roles for them. And so Weaver coming in and having less of an overall role where he's in charge and the final decision maker, maybe that's not the right kind of thing for him. Put him in this kind of role, though, and maybe you can see him succeed again and really help this team. And again, the Pelicans need to get this team correct, or they need to get these hires and this structure correct. That's a really important thing for this team. Otherwise, they're going to be set back. And, when you heard Gail Benson say, I want to win a title, if you don't get this right, you're not winning one for 10, 20 years. You're going to struggle to be a playoff team, and it's going to be a long, long time till you kind of get out of where you want to be and into the spot that you do, because this is not a team that's going to really go through the rebuild, right? Like, they're going to push for the playoffs next season, when frankly, maybe the smarter long-term play is to tear it down, try and get back to where you want to be in like 3 years, which I think could be doable. But if you kind of push for the playoffs, don't get there, don't do that rebuild, it sets you back like an extra couple of years every time you do that sort of thing. It's a concern. We'll see. There's reasons to be optimistic about this move, though, even if kind of my initial reaction was like, I don't really love this and wish the team would go in a different direction. But we're being optimistic. Look, they're hired. It is what it is. Here's how they succeed, and that's what we're going to talk about here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So coming up next, Pelicans voted third worst franchise per The Athletic. I have some thoughts on this overall and kind of why you see some of the rankings the way that they are. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We're here Monday through Friday. I'm a little thrown off today. I was doing some traveling, and flying today was awful. But we're here now, and it's fun. By the way, make Locked On NBA Game Night your second listen today, and Locked On Saints. It's the draft. I got that on in the background and everything too. There's a lot going on today. Locked On NBA Game Night covering the playoffs. I'm on there every Friday. That's a lot of fun. Locked On Saints to see what the Saints do at 9. I don't know yet when I'm recording this. I want a new QB. I just want a new QB. Give it to me somewhere in this postseason. So that's your second listen today. All right, Pelicans voted third worst franchise per players in a poll taken by The Athletic. Truthfully, this is no surprise to me. Do I actually think they're one of the 3 worst overall franchises? Maybe not in the bottom 3, but they are certainly in the bottom third kind of right now, because it feels like a lot of the work that David Griffin was doing over the past 6 years was kind of just getting them up to snuff, right? When it comes down to it, in terms of facilities, in terms of kind of the things that they were doing, people that you have, trainers, all those things. That was something that the team had really been lacking in for a very long time. And David Griffin was just doing his best to kind of get them there. For all of his faults, I do think he left this franchise in a better position than it was before in just terms of infrastructure when it comes to this, because they did not have the investment from ownership in the past. They have recently. They just went through another renovation of the facility the past year. There have been multiple renovations, adding in new things, making changes where you need to make the changes. And David Griffin was getting ownership to spend. Simple as that. So they're in a better spot than they had been before. But a lot of teams, a lot of players aren't necessarily seeing that. And when you look at who they were saying is a bad franchise versus a good franchise, a lot of it just has to do with winning and losing. A lot of it has to do with winning and losing. This is what it all comes down to in the NBA. Wins and losses. If you win, it covers over everything else and no one cares. This is why when I say process over results is great, I agree with that. I literally am just so out of it today, knocking things over. Process over results is important. I apply that to my everyday life. But results matter in sports. And at a certain point, you've just got to look at the record, and that's going to say what it is. You can have all the greatest facilities in the world, but if you're, injured and losing games, people are just going to have the negative perception about you. And when you have a Pelicans team that does not make the postseason in back-to-back years, yeah, of course no one's going to think that highly of you. That's why they're going to push for the playoffs next year, right? To try and shake some of this. They haven't made the postseason in back-to-back years since 07-08 and then 08-09. That's the last time they made back-to-back postseason. And I don't count the play-in tournament and losing in that sort of thing. Now, they've made the playoffs 2 out of the last 4 years. It's good, but it's not back-to-back years, right? And you lost both those first-round series, one of them including a sweep really badly last year against the Oklahoma City Thunder. It comes down to winning, and it comes down to winning consistently. Pelicans can win. They have won. They won 49 games last year, but they don't win consistently, and that is the big problem. You've got to win consistently. To do that, you need good infrastructure in place. You need to kind of find the right players to build around. You need a little bit of luck too. That's some of the areas that the Pelicans are lacking, right? If Zion has been healthy for his career, playing more games than missing, which is not how it's been, they would be viewed very differently. It's as simple as that. Now, they need to do more probably around player families, creating that kind of correct atmosphere, because that is an area that I've heard a lot of complaints about. But overall, win. How you treat players' families doesn't matter then as much, as long as you don't treat them bad. And I don't think the Pelicans treat them bad. I just don't think it's like this first-class service that they're getting. You got to win, and you got to win consistently. And can this team, as they're constructed right now, do that? And I think the answer is probably no. We think it's safe to say that. Are you going to be able to win consistently behind Zion Williamson? I'd love it to be the case, but it just doesn't feel like that's going to be the case when it comes down to it. So they need to figure out how to do that. That might mean you rebuild, tear it down, then build it back up in a better way. That's probably what I would do. But I think this franchise is going to push for the playoffs next season. You know, putting them in the same area as the Wizards or some of those teams. There are teams, and we talked about this, that have far longer playoff droughts than the New Orleans Pelicans do. And I'd worry more about that, right? This is a team that's capable of getting into the postseason here and there. This is not like, again, Detroit going 21 years without winning a playoff game. Now, they're good this year. You know, previously, would you have said they're not a bottom 4 team? No, you absolutely would have said that. You absolutely would have said that. Especially after 28 games last year, losses in a row. But they were good this year, so they don't fall in the bottom 4. That's how this is viewed, right? You win, people think good things about you. You lose, they don't think good things about you. It's really as simple as that. This is where I say results have to matter. The results just simply have to matter. I don't care how you get there. Good, bad process. Win games, do it consistently. Now, that process over results and then results over process argument, discussion, whatever you want to call it. Look, if you don't have good infrastructure in place and all of those things, if you don't have a good process, you might win here and there, but you won't win consistently. So the Pelicans need to establish that good process, and it'll lead to good things. That's usually the way that you view it. So yeah, you can win fluky. You're going to have a fluky season here and there, but overall, are you going to be able to win a title? Can you win consistently? Look, this city will go nuts if the team's capable of getting into the postseason 2 years in a row. The support you would see around the city, the money that would come in that allows you to upgrade the things you need to upgrade, you can do all that. That's what they got to do. It comes down to winning. This poll of players proves the point of results matter, maybe even over process. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about the Troy Weaver hire? Let me know. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See y'all next time.